Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to focus on the big story of the day, renewed fighting between Iran and the US, which was paused for now, and fears that the fragile peace agreement could be about to unravel.
The US and Iran have carried out tit-for-tat strikes, effectively breaching their ceasefire.
The ceasefire, the supposed ceasefire, is in real danger, I think, of breaking down.
That tit-for-tat exchange with the Americans started over the weekend, and they did that to make their point that they need to control the Strait.
Any interference or attempt to establish new or separate arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz will only lead to further complications.
Iran has a choice to make. It's going to be a responsible nation, or it can continue down this path to absolute ruin.
So we're looking at the latest flare-up in fighting between Iran and the United States, what that means for the fragile ceasefire agreed less than 2 weeks ago, and why all eyes are on the standoff in the Strait of Hormuz. Let's start with the latest developments. There have been several days of tit-for-tat strikes between the US and Iran, with both countries accusing each other of violating the ceasefire. The US says both sides have now agreed to, quote, stand down, and negotiations remain on track. Well, here's our correspondent Yolande Nell with a breakdown of the back and forth attacks.
Starting with Iran firing those projectiles, damaging a cargo ship last Thursday in the Strait of Hormuz. Then the US response targeting what it said were military positions in Iran over the weekend. And then Iran responding as well by targeting once again Kuwait and Bahrain, which both host US military bases.
Well, our Middle East correspondent John Donaldson joins us now. John, let's start with that basic question. Many people asking, why are the US and Iran again clashing?
Well, basically because the principal achievement of that deal, that Memorandum of Understanding a few weeks ago, that Iran and the US deal, was to open up the Straits of Hormuz. That was a key priority of the United States because of the damage its closure was doing to the global economy. But Iran wants to administer and control how the strait is reopened. It has accused America of trying to use alternative shipping lanes within the strait rather than the ones that Iran wants to use. So that's why we've had Iran firing with drones on some tankers, and then the exchanges of fire, the retaliation.
And we've mentioned that the Iranian strikes have been targeting US military sites in Kuwait and Bahrain. Why aren't those countries themselves retaliating when it comes to all of this?
Well, it's a good question. Some Gulf countries have retaliated, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, I think perhaps Qatar as well. Essentially, it's because Kuwait and Bahrain are allies of the United States. There are many, many bases, American bases in Kuwait. There's a Fifth Fleet, a huge base is in Bahrain, and they're letting the Americans do it for them.
And if you cut to the chase, if Iran and the US are fighting again, does that mean the ceasefire is over?
It doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean the deal has collapsed. We are expecting talks to resume in Doha in the Gulf tomorrow, but it shows just how fragile it is, and this is before we've even got to negotiating the most difficult issues, which of course in particular includes Iran's nuclear program.
Well, let's turn now to the Strait of Hormuz, the critical waterway which has become an incredibly powerful negotiating tool for Iran. The strait has effectively been closed since the war broke out 4 months ago, a move which has put the global economy in an increasingly vulnerable position. Well, President Trump hoped the recent ceasefire deal would keep the strait open for business, but the past few days of violence have thrown things into disarray once again. Well, here's our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, on why the strait has been dragged back into this conflict.
There was a plan to try to get ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz, out of the Gulf, following a route that hugs the Omani coastline. Oman is the country opposite Iran on the other side of the strait. Now, that's something that the Iranians were very much against because they believe, I think correctly, that one of the great, for them, strategic gains of the war has been the fact that it's clear that they have a chokehold over the strait. So they want shipping to move in waters that they control.
Back to John Donaldson. And John, can you explain why the Strait of Hormuz is so important?
Well, it's important because 20% of the world's oil and petrochemicals normally flows through the strait, and its closure has had a huge impact on the global economy and the money that billions of people have in their pockets. So it has seen a surge in the price of oil. It has seen a rise in the price we're paying for petrol at the fuel pumps. It has seen a rise in the price of fertilizers, in the price of plastics. It has seen inflation increase in many countries around the world, and therefore the amount of interest we're paying on our mortgages at home. So it really is affecting, the vast proportion of the people in the world will be affected in some way by its closure, and that's why for the Americans it's been such a key priority to get it reopened.
And there are quite a lot of conflicting messages at the moment. Do we know, is the strait open or still largely closed?
I would say it's still largely closed. Before the war, there were around 130 ships, so tankers, cargo ships passing through the strait every day. And I think since the deal between the US and Iran came into force, I think around 200 or thereabouts have managed to leave. So nowhere near those pre-war levels. And there are still hundreds of ships stuck in the strait. They've been there for months with sailors on board who've been a long, long time at sea and keen to get out. And so far they haven't been able to do so. And many of the ships that are getting out are Iranian tankers carrying Iranian oil, because a key concession the Iranians got was out of the deal was a waiver on sanctions against Iranian oil, allowing them to put billions back into their economy.
Well, exactly on that point, what is happening then with the price of oil?
Well, on the news that we'd had a deal, the price fell pretty dramatically, but then when we had these exchanges of fire at the weekend, it goes up again. It's nowhere near at the peak that it was at the worst moments of the war, but I think oil traders are probably hedging a bit at the moment to see which way it goes. But broadly, I think there is an acceptance that neither the United States or Iran want to go back to full-scale war. It's been a very unpopular war in the United States, with key elections coming up for Congress at the midterm elections in November. President Trump's Republican Party doing badly in the polls, so they don't want to go back to war. And Iran, of course, has taken an absolute pummeling from Israel and the United States. So they've got good reasons to not want to go back to war either.
Well, another complicating factor in the pursuit of a longer-term peace deal is the situation in Lebanon. Iran wants all the fighting there to end. Meanwhile, Israel wants to keep pressure on the armed group Hezbollah, an ally of Iran. Well, on Friday, Israel and Lebanon signed a framework agreement aimed at paving the way to a lasting peace deal. But renewed fighting over the weekend has strained that process. Well, over the course of the war, the conflict in Lebanon has been a constant source of friction between President Trump and his Israeli counterpart, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This was President Trump speaking just a couple of weeks ago.
Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
Well, let's go back to John Donaldson, because, John, if Donald Trump wants the conflict to stop and a framework has been agreed, why are Israel and Hezbollah still fighting?
Well, I think the questions you've been asking indicate just what a complex web this conflict has become. Now, Donald Trump wants the fighting in Lebanon to at least ramp down, even though Israel is a key ally. And he wants that because Iran has insisted that Lebanon has to be a part of the broader deal that Donald Trump is trying to reach with Tehran. But Israel doesn't want the war to stop in Lebanon. It has scaled down operations reluctantly, and for many weeks the fighting was still going on. And Prime Minister Netanyahu here in Israel, he's also got elections coming up in a few months' time, and he's under enormous pressure here from members of his own cabinet, the public, the opposition, to continue the fight against Hezbollah. So in the last, 48 hours. Things have dialed down a bit in Lebanon, but while there are still Israeli forces occupying a large chunk of southern Lebanon, about 5% of the country, while Hezbollah, Iran's ally, has not signed up to any sort of ceasefire deal, and the Lebanese army, frankly, doesn't have the means to disarm Hezbollah as this deal that was signed on Friday wants them to do. It's another flashpoint where you could see this broader deal with Iran put at risk.
So, a final thought, will the fighting in Lebanon unravel the broader peace process, do you think?
As I say, I really think President Trump wants this deal to make progress. He doesn't want to go back to war, and I think he will be putting pressure on the Israelis for it not to escalate in Lebanon and jeopardize the deal. But I don't think you're going to see Israeli forces withdraw. So I think you might see low-level exchanges of fire. But while that's happening, there is a risk of a miscalculation. You could get an escalation in Lebanon and the whole thing could unravel. But for the moment, I would say, although going through difficult times, the deal is still slowly progressing, although at a very slow pace and with a lot of the most difficult talking still to be done.
John Donaldson, thank you. That's all you need to know about the latest fighting between the United States and Iran and how that impacts the chances of a longer-term peace deal.